It's my huge pleasure this evening to introduce Paul Walsh, chairman of McLaren Group, a holding company that is home to McLaren Formula One and other motorsport activities, as well as the manufacturer of the iconic McLaren sports cars and golf equipment. Paul has an innate knack for what it takes to make and grow great brands. He cut his teeth working for Grand Metropolitan, which people refer to as Grand Met, the British FTSE 100 hotels, brewing and foods company that was the training ground for so many of Britain's great retailers. During his time there, he led many of the great brands, including Häagen-Dazs ice cream, where he was CEO of Pillsbury, and Old El Paso, part of the Tex-Mex foods, before joining the Grand Met Board of Directors in 1995 at the age of 40. 2 years later, Grand Met merged with Guinness and changed its name to Diageo. Paul was appointed its CEO in 2000 and presided over an impressive transformation at the business into a streamlined premium drinks company whose brands today include whiskey brands Lagavulin, Talisker, and in the US, Bulleit Bourbon, Smirnoff and Ciroc Vodka, Tanqueray and Gordon's Gin, Bailey's Irish Cream, Don Julio and Casamigos Tequila, and of course, Guinness. After stepping down from Diageo, Paul chaired the FTSE 100 catering services group Compass between 2014 and 2020, and he was appointed chair of McLaren Group in 2020. In addition to these roles, Paul has been a non-exec at FedEx, Unilever, General Mills, and Centrica, and in recognition of all of this, he's recently been appointed as a visiting fellow here at Oxford. So well done, Paul. Here's how this evening's talk will run. Paul will speak for about 15 minutes on the theme of high-performance leadership and marketing in this new age, following which Oxford professor Juliana Reinecker and King's College London professor Paolo Aversa will join him on stage here for a discussion before we open for Q&A with you. My colleague and friend, Professor Juliana Reinecker, needs very little of any introduction, so I'm going to pass, with your blessing, I'm going to pass over the introduction of Juliana, who needs no introduction, but let me briefly introduce Professor Paolo Aversa, who has come here from London for this evening. Professor Aversa is Professor of Strategy at King's Business School, part of King's College London, an adjunct professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Jonas Persson Visiting Professor at Stockholm School of Economics, Centre for Sports and Business. His research focuses on innovation and the evolution of industries and ecosystems, concentrating on technology-intensive settings to explore radical innovations, digital transformation, and business models. He's globally considered one of the leading academic experts in the motorsport and Formula One industry, which is why, of course, we're delighted that you're here tonight. And his research often features in the international media, including the Financial Times, New York Times, the BBC, as well as many sports-related outlets. Paolo has received numerous awards for his research, teaching, and impact. He was listed among the world's best under 40 professors, and by poets and quants. And the presidency of Italy also awarded him a knighthood for his professional achievements and his contribution to the country. He works very closely with Juliana, and Paolo, it's a great pleasure to welcome you back to Oxford this evening. So, Paul, with that, over to you.
Thank you for a most gracious introduction, and let's lose that picture of me. First of all, a little bit of background on McLaren. It was started in 1963 by Bruce McLaren. His first Formula One debut was in 1966. Tragically, he was killed in 1970 testing Can-Am-style cars whilst at the Goodwood racecourse. Bruce was a brilliant engineer and an avid racer, and in his relatively short life, overcame many, many obstacles. In fact, as a child, he suffered from polio, and for much of his childhood, actually was bedridden. But he had this tenacity that he wanted to race, and he learned his mechanical skills at his father's garage. So, McLaren today, basically, we are three businesses. We have our road car business. I call them works of art on wheels. They are gorgeous, and they're gorgeous to look at. I can assure you they're even better to drive. We make about 2,500 units a year. An entry level probably is around £300,000, but you can go all the way to the W1, that's a limited edition track car that probably is around £3 million. And by the way, fully sold out. It's interesting, at 2,500, we started producing road cars maybe 15 years ago. Ferrari have been in the game. See, I can say Ferrari without wincing. They've been in the game since the 50s, and therefore we've probably got about a third of their share. So not bad, given that we're relatively new to that game. So the road car division. We then have a brand company. Marketing is what I kind of grew up on, and therefore I love dabbling in this area. We believe that the McLaren brand can stand for much more than just racing and cars and automotive stuff. At its heart, it's basically technology and performance. And therefore, an obvious step-off point for us is to look at performance sports. So we've enlisted the help of Justin Rose, and we've just launched a range of very, very high-quality clubs. Maybe they can even make a difference to my game. But, and of course, we charge quite a lot for them. If an average Callaway club is selling at £220 per club, I think ours are retailing for about £500 per club. But if you can buy a McLaren and you like golf and you think it's going to help your game, you'll pay it. And we've got other ideas on how we can move the brand into contiguous space. But at its heart, this is not just slapping the brand on any category. There has to be a performance edge. Otherwise, we wouldn't be true to the provenance of the brand and indeed what Bruce created. The third element is, of course, racing. I'll cover this in more detail. We cover an array of racing formats. And the question that I'm most asked is, Paul, how does a guy move from Grand Met and Diageo, marketing beverage alcohol, to be chairman of McLaren? Well, it's quite simple. When I was at Diageo, I had a view that Scotch whisky had become a little dusty. It was your father's drink. It wasn't very lifestyle-oriented. So we needed to knock the dust off, and I became title sponsor of McLaren with Johnny Walker. And in life, it's often better to be lucky than good. That was the first year when Lewis Hamilton got his constructors. First year. And I was at the race in Brazil. Myself and a colleague sketched out this ad. And it was from rookie to world champion. Keep walking. And it just captured our imagination, and we just blasted that around the world. And you could see a palpable growth in the brand. So I got to know the owners of McLaren, and then when the company had a few issues in 2020, they asked me to come in as executive chairman. The ownership structure is basically the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Bahrain and the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Abu Dhabi. And they're very closely aligned. They are fabulous people to work with. It is truly patient capital, and we have tested their patience. I can tell you, going through the COVID period, that was quite an interesting time. You know, you You had to close the factory, so you're not making cars, you can't sell cars, you don't have cash flow. But what we did do is pivot very quickly to make ventilators for the government. So if you walk down our boulevard, you'll see the various model years of cars, and then in 2020, there's a ventilator. Anyway, kind of interesting. So obviously, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about racing and the platform that we've created. Why? Because it is the pinnacle of high performance. And I'll give you several examples of this. Having been a CEO of a publicly listed company, at times I have whined about quarterly reporting. That pales into insignificance when I look at the report card that myself and Zach have every Monday morning after a race. And by the way, I'm sorry I didn't get you a better result in Monaco last week. But it's blasted around the global airwaves, and we have a report card every other week. And in fact, if we've got back-to-back races, it's every week. We've got everybody telling us what we did wrong, how we've got to change it, how we need to sharpen up our act here, there, or whatever. And it's very real and in your face, as they say. So, racing is our DNA. That's what it's about. But we are part of a much, much larger ecosystem. To keep a Formula One team going, it costs about £500 million a year. We employ, just in Formula One, about 1,200 people. And then we've got IndyCar, we've got World Endurance on top of that. So you've got to figure out, yes, we want to race, but how do we pay the bills? And that's why we're looking at this whole ecosystem called sports marketing. Now, when I was a young man many years ago, marketing was pretty straightforward. Basically, you had limited number of channels, print, media, whatever, TV. And the consumers were it was like 10-pin bowling. The pins were lined up. And as a marketer, what you needed is the biggest bowling ball you could get. You'd polish it, you'd put a spin on it, and you'd hurl it at these pins and smash them. That was marketing. Consider what it's like now. Now, this has been evolving. It's not just happened in the last couple of years. But I think we are witnessing some of the most fundamental changes in human communication that we've seen. So, if you just look at some of these stats, 74% of the global population has got access to internet. Last year alone, 1.8 billion smartphones were sold. And we now have the global social media encompasses 5.7 billion people. So, quite startling when you consider that. 1.8 billion new phones being purchased every year as people want more functionality, more speed, and so on. You then look at the kind of new challenges that, oops, am I doing this right? The new challenges that come with that. Almost 750,000 hours worth of content that is uploaded to YouTube every day. 750,000 hours every day. 47% of the 16 to 34-year-olds are saying that all of this data, social media, is causing acute anxiety. Big, big issue. And 52% are saying that there is increasing levels of distrust in what is out there. So, whilst it's exciting what's going on, it brings with it some incredible challenges. And I'll talk about how sports marketing is trying to basically bridge some of those concerns. Overall, the ad business, advertising globally, is in great shape. It's expected that by 2027, the spend on advertising will be $1.4 trillion. However, you can see from the middle pie, the fragmentation is monumental. Not only fragmentation by channel, but within channel. It continues to be quite a myriad of opportunity for consumers to reach different particular delivery mechanisms. And here's an interesting one. 38% of marketers say that AI will feature in basically content creation and advertising. And it's interesting, I do a little bit of advising of a couple of ad agencies. And we recently briefed our young creative teams on a prop for one of our clients. At the same time, we tried to use ChatGPT to look at a similar brief. Now, ChatGPT gave us something that we could work with within hours. The human team took 3 weeks. Now, what I would then say is, once the human team got hold of what ChatGPT had to say, they actually became far more creative. And therefore, you saw the quality massively improve. But the front end, it's certainly better to sort of use some of these tools. And 38% of marketers are now saying they're going to do that. What is fabulous from our point of view, McLaren, is that 57% of those global marketeers, or 57% of the $1.4 trillion, are saying that sports will play a role in how they communicate the virtues of their brands, how they wish to activate the proposition that they are offering. That's very exciting from our point of view. And it's not surprising when you step back and look at what sport has to offer. It's got incredible credibility. It has community. You know, you look at, for us, a race and you see the papaya, the people coming together. I was at a bar in Florida, and I just had my McLaren cap on. And this guy and his girlfriend just came up to me and started talking. They just wanted to know, oh, you're McLaren. They didn't know that I was involved in McLaren. They just knew that I was a fellow fan. And it started that level of community. And also, the level of emotion that comes with sports is incredible. So, it's a very exciting time. Am I on the right one? I'm not. And it brings with it incredible advantages for marketers. First of all, you have reach. The penetration from sports is huge and it's global. You have the IP, so that the intellectual property, so if you're aligned with McLaren and you can put your brand alongside ours, the affiliation impact is huge. We offer our partners incredible opportunities, both within our ecosystem with our other sponsors, but also basically to participate in the reach that I talked about a few moments ago. It's highly relevant. If you look at our car, you will see a lot of tech firms on the livery because we're a high-tech company and they want that level of affiliation. So it brings with it tremendous relevance. And regularity. We are pulsing that marketplace all the time. We have 24 races a year, so the repetitive nature of our messaging is something that marketers quite enjoy. Cumulative audience for Formula One Indy, which is mainly a North American proposition, and World Endurance, probably known to most of you as Le Mans, but it's not just Le Mans, it's broader than that. 1.6 billion people watching those three sports. Social media following, up 18% year on year. So if you look at all of the channels that basically Formula One promote, 18% increase year on year. And the thing that is very encouraging, and this has been largely driven by a series out of Netflix called Drive to Survive, is how we've increased the diversity of our fan base. I would say 15 years ago, it was a white, male-dominated sport. No more. It is very, very much embracing, and you can see an increasingly number of females, 43%, who are taking interest in the sport. And we're leading the way. If you look at this chart, Ferrari have been at it a long time. And as much as I hate to tip my hat to the competition, they do a good job. They've got the iconography, they've got the history, they had Enzo, and but we've played pretty good catch-up, and you can see that we are right up there with them. For those who are not familiar with this kind of research, what you basically have are those who like and those who dislike. A lot of the lower teams, whilst they may have a lot of likes, they've also got a lot of don't likes, which actually neutralizes their overall position. That is not the case with McLaren. And, as I mentioned, we offer multiple points of entry for different sponsors with different budgets, with different marketing needs to come into the sport. Now, our mission. I walk around a lot of corporate offices, and you see our mission is to be the best. Our mission is to, and I find it all quite boring. When I have meetings, and I know my colleagues do the same, Zach particularly, we like to use photographs. This is our mission. Our mission is to win. Every single race, 1 and 2. We don't always achieve it, although we did pretty well last year, but we don't always achieve it. But that's our goal. But also, what else comes out of this? It should be teamwork. It should be celebration. It should be enjoyment, because we expect a lot of our people. And therefore, it's photographs like this that I think summarize exactly what we're about. And as we transition to talk a little bit about high performance, I want to give a couple of examples, because I said at the start that basically F1 motor racing sports is the pinnacle of performance. We have the world record for a tyre change. If you think 4 tyres coming off, 4 tyres going on, how long do you think that takes? 1.7 seconds is what we achieve. How many people are involved in that tyre change? 15. There is the driver. The driver has to stop on those marks. If he's 6 inches too far forward, he's probably going to take the leading jack operator out, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But everybody's going to have to move. That's a tenth of a second. This is a sport of tenths of seconds. We won the World Championship last year by 7/10 of a second. So a tenth of a second is very dear to our hearts. So the driver has to stop on the mark. The jack people, front and back, we're up to 3 now, have to raise the car. The gun person comes on, has to get on that spline straight away. The person pulls it off. And by the way, these are very heavy, unwieldy wheels. And then the other people come back in, put one on, and the gun goes back on, and off the driver goes. Now, teamwork. It's like It's like the ballet watching these people. It's incredible. They practice. They have physical training instructors. They are relentless in their quest to improve it by 1/10 of a second. That's the best example for me of high performance. Then you think about, well, you know, how did we celebrate that? Because here we are, the Guinness Book of Records came along. Actually, that was an asset that I sold. I figured when we owned Guinness that it wasn't particularly relevant. But anyway, we feature now in the Guinness Book of Records. So the people came along, and my colleague, Andrea Stella, gave a phenomenal speech to all the employees. And it went along the lines of, you know, I came here, I wanted to thank the pit crew for 1.7 seconds of a tyre change. He said, then I thought, I can't just thank them, I've got to thank the driver, because he stopped on the mark. And he said, I can't just thank them, I've got to thank the wheel gunner. And by the way, I can't just thank them. I've got to thank the finance people who funded the technology so that we created this particularly special wheel gun. By the time he'd finished, everybody was part of that wheel change. That's teamwork, that's high performance. So I'll stop there, and we can take this wherever you want to take it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. I want to start us off right where you left us about how your leadership travels across industries, because I think that's very intriguing. So, you know, as you told us, you spent 13 years running Diageo and building global consumer brands, and with now background in motorsports. And you were really known for brand building and discipline, and maybe being quite unsentimental about which assets to keep and which to sell. And I was just really wondering, what from a consumer good leadership playbook has translated into the world of racing and high performance motorsports? And maybe were there some things that maybe you even had to unlearn from your previous experience? Maybe because Formula One simply doesn't behave like a drinks company.
It certainly doesn't behave like a drinks company. But actually, I think the playbook of management, for me, is consistent. First of all, you have to have very, very clear objectives. And nothing can be clearer than what we have in McLaren. Very clear objectives. Then you have to get the people who are committed to delivering on them. Then you need the mechanisms to monitor your performance. That's the same no matter what business you're in. Get the best people, have very simple, challenging objectives, and then monitor yourself against them. I would say the big difference that I learned in Formula One is the speed. You know, look, we've not had a great start to the season. We have a post-mortem after every race. And again, my colleague Andrea Stella has got a great saying, is no poison biscuits. What we've got to do is get all the facts on the table. It's not about saying you did this, you did that, you didn't do that. Let's just get the facts on the table, then we can deal with them. What we don't have time to do is start hunting for what the truth is. We need it to be disclosed so we can get on it, because we've basically got 1 or 2 weeks to learn from that, put in place what we have to put in place, and move on. So that's the first thing, the sheer speed. The other thing is we've got to take chances. You know, I come from a classic consumer product background where you test, you retest, you reformulate. We've got to give it a go, you know. I mean, if we think, and it happened a few weeks ago, we thought that we had an idea on a wing. By the way, one of those wings at the front, that's £250,000 to do one of those, and those drivers do a lot of damage to them. But anyway, we thought we had an idea for this wing. Got worked in the wind tunnel, worked in CFD, got it on the car in pre-practice. The drivers weren't impressed. So we had to change back very quickly. So you've got to make decisions and you've got to go. You can't have people who are, let me think about that, let's contemplate whether this is the right thing or not. We've got to give it a go. And with that comes a mentality that there won't be any finger pointing if it goes wrong. So, a few things there.
Thanks. That's really interesting to think around taking chances as to basically drive forward.
Yeah, not reckless. We're not reckless in it, but we have to move.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, if you watch a race, and we made the wrong decision a few weeks ago, we've got to decide whether there's going to be rain or there isn't, and what tyres are we going with. We've got to decide if a safety car comes out, who we're pitting first. You don't have a long time to think about it. You've got seconds to make that decision. And there can only be one person who makes that call. Can't have a debate at the pit wall on, what do you think?
Yeah. And maybe to jump from there to the question of branding and brands as the strategic assets, because that also came out very prominently in your presentation. And I was wondering, how do you reconcile in the Drive to Survive era, the papaya brand's popularity has really surged and gained much a broader audience, but at the same time, McLaren is also a British heritage brand. And then you said it has kind of ownership structure with sovereign wealth funds. So how do you kind of reconcile maybe these different forces that circulate around the brand?
Well, first of all, our origins, or Bruce's origins, were New Zealand. He was a Kiwi. And if you look at the speed mark, originally that was like a Kiwi bird that evolved into being the speed mark. Papaya goes way back to Can-Am days. A lot of the Can-Am cars that were raced were in Papaya. And through the years, McLaren, I believe, from a pure iconography point of view, kind of lost its way. We had Vodafone Red. We had something silver. And we were migrating our brand and its stewardship into the hands of others. My background says never do that. So we had to recover it. And therefore, you will see consistency in the livery of our cars across formats. And even though we've just celebrated our 1000th Grand Prix, and we did do a special livery, the cues are the same. It's the same sort of palettes. So, first of all, the brand takes precedence. Regarding our owners, they've spent a lot of money on this company, so they're very happy to leave us to do the branding piece, and they do not get involved in that at all, even though they're very, very knowledgeable about the business and where they want to take it. We have to work very hard with our sponsors, and it would be indelicate of me to talk about sponsors that we have not embraced who would like to give us money, because we just do not see the fit. So, yeah, we are cautious. And if you look at the sort of livery of the car at the moment, we've probably got three big anchors. You've got MasterCard, you've got Google, you've got Allwyn, OKX, and all of their livery fits very well with the iconography that we are trying to orchestrate.
Paul, let's go into the racing. Let's go to the racetrack. So, 2026, one of the greatest changes in the regulations in the history of Formula One. You arrive as world...
You may use the word greatest. At the moment, I've got a slightly different term that I'd use.
That's where I wanted to get you, exactly. So, you arrive as world champion. We know that when regulations change, usually They pull the carpet under the feet of those who come with a championship. The regulations don't help teams that are not works team. And the results this year somehow seem to prove this theory. The regulations have been done with good intentions, probably designed in a different time. 2021, if I'm not wrong, is when they started talking about this. On the one hand, it seems like the show has brought more overtakes, more appealing races. On the other hand, some people say has changed the sport nature, the driving nature completely. I would like to know what you think about these regulations or this new era of Formula One, trying to stay away from the fact that in this very moment it might not be that favorable to McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I mean, first of all, so that people understand, why do the regs change every 5 years? The reason they change is that companies like us and the other teams, we constantly will try and improve the performance of the car. Yet you can't constantly improve the capacity of the track. So there are conflicting objectives here, whereby our cars will go faster, faster, faster. The track cannot evolve, and therefore there is a safety issue. So the FIA detune the car. And that's what they have done this time, as they did last time. What it means, we buy engines, and therefore it is totally understandable and legitimate that Mercedes, who are our suppliers, have got the march. Their drivers will have known what was coming before ours were. They'll have had this engine in the sim and so on. So it means we've got to work harder. Now, as every race goes by, we learn. The biggest issue that we have faced is really getting to grips with the new blend of internal combustion versus battery. We're getting there. That's brought with it certain challenges on reliability, but I'm confident that we'll sort it out.
Would you have done a 50-50?
No, but you're talking to someone who would, I pine to go back to the V8s. And a hybrid, still a hybrid, but a V8. The sound of that V8 is just gorgeous.
Staying on the topic of racing. Racing is about technology, it's about innovation, but it's also about leadership. And I think one wonderful thing in motorsport and Formula One is that in the leadership style of a company is seen sometimes in the way in which they manage their team, in which they manage their superstar drivers. Now, McLaren is famous for the famous papaya rules, right? Which is probably, on the one hand, one of the biggest, fair rules in motorsport. You let your drivers, you consider them equal, you let them race. But we know that from strategy perspective, sometimes this can be problematic and may create issues to the performance of the team. So what's your take on the controversial and blessed at the same time papaya rules?
Well, first of all, everybody seems to think they know what the papaya rules are. There are many rules that are not in the public domain. So that's the first thing. We are blessed with two very good drivers, and they understand that McLaren comes first. Once we've secured the constructors, as we did last year, then they can have at it, and we support them in that. They get on well, but there is no question they are racers. And once they get behind that wheel and those lights go out, they're racing. They have not had as many, how can I put it, contretemps as they could have had. There was the one where Lando sort of put it into the wall last year. It wasn't well known, but fundamentally what happened there is he came around the bend and he got a gust of wind that accelerated him towards Oscar, and he actually veered off. So it wasn't that he was being reckless, it was just a sort of fluke. So, yeah, we've got clear rules, but equally, the races. and they will err from time to time, and we will have to be tolerant, but not too tolerant.
I also want to come to maybe one of the tensions that may be a bit at the heart of motorsports. And so I'm a sustainability academic, and McLaren Racing has committed to achieving net zero by 2040, also aligned with the science-based targets. And so there's this obvious tension at the heart of motorsports is high-performance competition, global logistics footprint, credible climate commitment, and as the fan base is also growing, it's less and less monolithic. So you might have customers who are increasingly expecting credible sustainability leadership, while others are deeply attached to the more visceral culture of traditional motorsport and may view the whole green agenda with a lot of skepticism. So I was just wondering, how do you navigate these tensions without alienating either side?
Yeah, I mean, it's a balance. And I would advocate that if we look at Formula E, that was very green in its credentials, it was rejected by the fans because it was boring. It was boring. You didn't get the sound, you didn't get the speed, you didn't get the sheer gladiatorial aspect of what it's about. So I think we have to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time. We need to make sure that we are advancing the sustainable agenda, but at the same time, not losing the show. Because if we do, this will go the way of the dinosaur. And that's what we're trying to do.
Staying on the electrification, and it's an assist for you if you want to shoot hard. So last days have been characterized by this backlash of the launch of the Ferrari Luce, this new electric vehicle that Ferrari brought forward. It was debated at the very least product choice, both in the fact that they went into the segment, how they went. What is the position of you as car lover and then as McLaren as a group towards this type of move towards electrification?
This is a big question. First of all, the issue for me with the Ferrari is it doesn't look like a Ferrari. It actually looks like a Tesla, or it looks, it doesn't seem to be true to the design cues of Ferrari. And by the way, I've owned Ferraris. I'm not allowed to own one now, but I've owned them, and I love them. I mean, they're fabulous cars. It's a bit off-piste for me. So I think that's where they've been dinged. Regarding the future of electric, I mean, it varies massively by where in the world you are. I mean, China has gone electric. I mean, and there's no coming back. The US is fighting it tooth and nail because they haven't got the infrastructure, they drive huge distances, and they want big vehicles. And they're not comfortable. So that's going to go at a slower pace. Now, where do I think it will all pan out? I think there will be a role for internal combustion engine. I think there'll be a role for a pure hybrid, and I think there'll be a role for electric. The reality is, for McLaren, nobody needs a McLaren. You don't need a McLaren. You want a McLaren. And if you want a McLaren, you want it to drive like a McLaren. And right here, right now, we'd walk away from that consumer desire at huge peril.
I actually need a McLaren, I have to say.
Well, I know someone who can help you.
I wonder whether that's a good moment to open it up to our audience. And we have microphones going around here. And I should also say that we'll stop the official recording of the session now. Please raise your hands. And I think we have our first question there. Maybe briefly, very briefly say your name and...
Yeah, I'm Kate Bancroft. I'm an academic here. I work in health, but I also do a lot of research into F1 on the side and mostly women's inclusion and things like that. came from King's 2 years ago. So it's quite a long question, so I've written it as a paragraph. My boyfriend is also Carlos Sainz's engineer, so I don't know how you feel about that. Is he someone you'd like?
Carlos is a hell of a nice guy. He used to drive for us. Very nice guy.
Yeah. Okay, so we've still got good feelings there. Okay, it's a little bit about your background, so I hope you don't mind me asking a personal question. So I wanted to ask, given that your father was a pipe fitter, and I know he's had his own engineering company later on, and noting that you attribute your work ethic to your father, the first part of the question is, how did you navigate the transition from, I don't know if you describe it as a working class background, to, the luxury sector work that you're obviously incredibly high up in now? So how did that transition go? And secondly, as someone who has recently been advised by a professor at King's that in order for people to take me seriously and progress to professorship here at Oxford, I need to lose my northern accent and not wear bright colours. So I was wondering if you'd ever experienced any prejudice or judgment stemming from your northern accent as well.
Have I got a northern accent?
I think you are. Is that okay? So 2 parts to that. So yeah, the working class background to your transition into the luxury sector.
Well,
And secondly, if you feel you have a northern accent still, have you ever had prejudice around that?
Very profound question. I did come from a very humble working class background. Rather proud of it. I think the biggest disappointment my father had, he wasn't a pipe fitter, he was a thermal engineer. I don't know what, the press has dumbed his role down. He was a thermal engineer. His biggest disappointment is I didn't go into engineering. And when I said, I really like this marketing, he said, what a load of BS that is. Anyway, I seem to have done all right on it. But, I was taught work ethic at a very early age. And as hard as I think I've worked, it pales into insignificance against what certainly my father did. Regarding my northern stock, the worst I had, and this is a true story, I came to London and was... one individual said to me, Paul, he said, I think you could go far. You've got a lot of talent. He said, but you need to lose the accent. And if anything, that made me more determined to remain true to my roots. I lived 13, 14 years in the States, and in fact still have a home there. But I think during that period of time, I sort of became a little bit Americanized. It was Z's, not Z's, and it was trunks, not boots, and all of that. But what I say to people is, look, judge people on what they do. As long as they've got good values and they deliver the goods, the rest is irrelevant. By the way, there was a time in Grand Met, and it certainly was true in certain US companies, whereby you got to a certain level in the management ranks, and you were told what the dress code was. You were told it was either navy blue suit, by the way, you're at this level now, it should be French cuff with cufflinks. I mean, you were told that. I'm giving my age away now, but there we are. Hence, you can tell I don't really subscribe to that now.
Oh, we have a couple of hands. Okay, yeah.
Oh, right. Want to go? Yeah. Hi, my name's Kevin May. I run a local consultancy locally, but my background is in advertising and brand marketing. So very interested to hear what you had to say on that front. Again, it's another 2-part question. The first is, you showed a chart that showed that that McLaren had the highest favourability in terms of most likability among people. Is that important to McLaren as a business? That it is, how much difference does it make to your commercial ends whether you drop down that chart or sit at the top of it? And secondly, following on from that, the words that you've used to describe the brand around performance and technology and sort of team building and that sort of stuff. they feel like the sorts of things that most of those teams on that list would lay claim to. Is there anything from a personality point of view you could articulate that distinguishes McLaren as a brand in the space that you're in beyond just the sort of the functional aspects of the excellence that you strive for?
Yeah. Well, first of all, that Gantt chart is important to us because it's important to our sponsors. Basically, we are renting out our livery to our sponsors who are paying us money to allow us to go racing. So they want eyeballs, they want friendly eyeballs on their particular icons, and therefore that's associated with McLaren, so it's very important. Regarding the personality of the brand, I've touched on a few points. It's far deeper than time would allow me to go into. There is no question that Formula One is a high-tech environment, high-tech sport, and therefore all of those teams would embrace technology. What I would say is if you look at the credentials of the tech companies that are sponsoring McLaren, I'm biased, but they are of a higher order than those going on other cars. And I think that tells you that they are maybe more respectful of the kind of borders or boundaries that we're pushing than maybe some of the other firms. So, yeah, in a world whereby we're all there, I think we're probably a little bit more advanced. The one thing that, few people hear about me, but everybody hears about my mate, Zach, Zach and I have known each other for 25 years. It was Zach who first got me into motorsport sponsorship when I was at Grand Met. He has this lovely saying about McLaren and papaya. If you go around the world at the moment, what do you think the most common baseball cap is? I'll tell you what it is. It's the New York Yankees. We want the speed mark and papaya to overtake that. We want that familiarity. We want that embrace. We want that fandomship. So, yes, we are these sterile things like technology, but also we want personality, and we want empathy, and we want community. And I think we do that, I'm biased, a bit better than most of the others.
Mm-hmm. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Hilary Hoyt. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow here, and I study the experiences of humans in organizations, and I'm interested at the intersection of branding and the humans who are particularly assets of your brand, and I'm thinking of the two humans who are your drivers. When a human is such a big part of the branding, and I don't know how big of a part you think that they play, but I think that they're key in the likability and the personality and so on. I assume it comes with some liabilities, and I assume that there's some kind of tension between trying to mitigate those liabilities of a brand being reliant on human beings and then also making space for those humans to be humans. And I'm wondering, how do you, from a marketing perspective, do that with your drivers? That'd be question 1. And 2, what would the marketing considerations be for putting one of those drivers in all of the 3 races?
Yeah. As I said, we are blessed with 2 very good human beings. I can think, but I'm not going to name them, of certain other drivers in the sport who do not embrace some of the qualities that our drivers do. Humility, engagement, being part of the grit, the roots of what makes the team the team. And I've experienced some of that in the past with McLaren. When something goes wrong, it's always someone else's fault. We don't have that with our drivers. So they become part of the brand. The 2 sort of morph together, and that's fine as long as you can channel that particular synergy in the right direction. I think when you start to see people go their own direction, that's when the team starts to fragment. And I don't want to say more than that, but I would suggest you look back to last season and look at some of the teams, or one in particular, that started to fragment. And I would advocate that in part it was that divergence of values. Divergence of values.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Paul. Lovely presentation. I'm Kaveri, an MBA student here, and I'm asking this question purely for the love of sports. Barring McLaren, if you were not allowed to pick McLaren, or let me reframe that, after McLaren, what is your most favorite team, or which team do you respect the most, and you think that we, like as McLaren, you can emulate more of, or you already are, and they're just doing, if not as good, but almost as good? And I can guess it's not Red Bull.
Yeah, well, when I was considering sponsoring a Formula One team, I'll tell you the three teams that were on my list. Ferrari, because Ferrari's got to be on your list. However, I found Ferrari very unfriendly to me as a potential sponsor. They were incredibly rigorous around what you could do, what you couldn't do, and I didn't feel they were taking us seriously. The one that had tremendous personality was Williams. Now, maybe that was because of Frank Williams or whatever, but they were a lovely team to deal with. For me, McLaren sort of was the best of both worlds, and hence why we went down that. So those would be the three. I think Mercedes is a bit sterile. For a lot of sponsors, I think Red Bull could be a little juvenile. So they've all got their pluses and minuses. I like where I am, so I ain't going anywhere else.
Hi, I'm Yushi. I'm a PhD student in molecular biology. The question is, during the end of your tenure at Diageo, you increased exposure of the group in India and China. What were the major challenges facing you back then? And now, as motorsport becoming more popular in emerging markets, what kind of strategy are you looking to implement to increase exposure in those places?
Yeah, I mean, basically, the reason that I was very keen in the autumnal days of my Diageo part of my career was increasing affluence in emerging markets and a lot of population. For a consumer product company, that's what you want. So hence why we moved in with pace into India by buying United Spirits off Vijay Mallya, quite a character. I like Vijay, he's a good friend of mine. And into China with Shui Fang, that is the Baijiu, and that's probably a huge category. So basically it was around affluence and sheer numbers of population. If you look at Formula One, we've got an issue, and this is one of the reasons why we've increased our, our billboard by going into Indy and into World Endurance, because Formula One can't do more than 24 races. It's a logistics nightmare. And you've seen, we're filling up the car with sponsors, so we need other billboards to sort of continue to grow and develop the brand. I think you've seen Liberty do a fabulous job with Formula One. They've taken it to a whole new level. Their ideas around Drive to Survive, the fact they put the cost cap in, made it, hugely leveled the playing field. The fact they've gone to 3 races in the US. I think what we need to do now, given in Formula One we can't do more than 24 practically, we need to start thinking about these in and outs. So you won't always have a race at a particular circuit. And that way, it will allow us to penetrate Asia to a greater extent. And I think that's the next frontier.
There's still a couple of hands, so with your permission, we will take a couple of extra minutes. But if you do have to go, don't feel forced to stay. But we take a couple of more questions.
Hi, I'm Kat Rivers, and I'm from the R&D pharmaceutical industry and strategic transformation. First, I'd like to say, as a Boston Red Sox fan, I would be really happy if New York Yankees caps were displaced in the world. So totally support that. Secondly, in a world where you're describing that 0.7 of a second makes a difference between being a champion, how do you think about allocating capital between like more incremental innovation that may help you save 0.1 of a second in one season versus more transformational innovation, which may put you in a leadership position in 3 or 4 years down the road?
Yeah, we don't spend a lot of time looking at capital allocation. In my previous life, I did. We look at ideas. We look at the probability of them playing out as our engineers tell us they will play out. We have learned that swinging for the home run is probably not going to get us the results that we need. We need a lot of incremental improvements, recognizing that not everyone will pay off. But a huge bet, if we saw one, we'd probably take a deep breath and go for it, but we don't really see a lot of that coming our way. We will probably in a season have 2 what we call significant performance upgrades. That may be 0.3 of a second, and then we'll have a lot of 0.1. And we always say we'd rather have 7 0.1 than 1/3. A lot less capital as well.
Hi, James McDougall. I'm a business transformation consultant. You said at the start about high performance. If you could know what you know from your experience at McLaren and take it back into your roles in previous other businesses, what lessons would you learn? What would you apply to those other models of business to make them high performance?
Right. If I look back on my career, I've been too slow on the trigger with people too many times. When you know people ain't cutting it, I think I'm a decent person. You give them a second go, and then if you like them, you give them a third go. And sometimes you shouldn't. Sometimes you should say, enough is enough. It's not good for the individual. It's not good for the business. We got to move on. And I would look at myself in the mirror and say, too often I've been too slow. I think I've learned that, which doesn't mean that I've lurched to the other extreme, but I'm more pragmatic. And as I give my sort of seniority, as I spend most of my time now coaching people, I often say, by the time you think you've got a problem, you've got a bigger problem than you think you have. So I think being decisive, but again not reckless, would be an important component. The other thing I would say is I don't think people spend enough time building deep alignment. It's very easy to go into your conference rooms and you all nod and high-five it, but when people walk away from that setting, do they really, really believe the same things? And I don't think there's enough time spent to build that alignment. The other one that is very much on my mind is do not mislead people that they can have it all. I'll tell you now, in McLaren, given where we are, forget work-life balance. Until we get back on podiums, it's work. I don't care whether you've got vacations to cancel. I do not care. It's work. Often, people want to assuage and you know, yeah, of course we believe in work-life balance. Well, there may come a time for that. I can tell you right now for us, it's not now. And I don't think management are often true on some of these points because it's a tough message. But there we are.
Hi, Bond, and thank you for fascinating speak. I'm a chief learning scholar and master student in educational leadership at UCL. I'm a founder of a social enterprise teaching 1,000 orphan students. So on behalf of them, I have the question for you. If you could teach students only one thing about entrepreneurship in a single day, what would it be, and why do you think it is the most important lesson for them? That's the question.
Say that again, I didn't quite catch it. Give me the question.
Most of my students, they are orphaned, and they
Orphaned?
yes, and they come from the really low social income background. So they want to ask you if you could be their teacher for one single day, and you teach them about the entrepreneurship, what would it be the lesson, and why do you think the lesson is important for them to learn?
I think it would be around communication and teamwork. And maybe, I think I've always felt this, but I've seen it in sharp relief in McLaren. Because of the speed issue that I mentioned, you've got to be very good at communicating. And I think that's true in many walks of life. And I have no doubt in my mind that there is no single individual that is as powerful as a team. And I think if you can get that through to your students, it may be worthwhile to them.
So the stewards have told us that we passed the finish line. So I think we need to.
I just hope we pass it this weekend.
We need to go to the trophy room and enjoy a drink. But thank you so much for being with us, and best of luck for all these wonderful things that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.